Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Uh, let's put that on. It's not so. Just a minute. Hi everybody. This is the fourth audio blog that I'm doing here in the UK. It's probably been what's it been? Nearly a month. It's been nearly a month since I've been here, and for the last week, I've not only been really sick, but I've had my sister and we've hung out a bit together. But I've also been doing some pretty cool stuff during this study trip of geolocative audio, and I'd like to have a chat about them. Chat about a number of things I've been doing. Actually, it's quite funny that I'm set up here because I was meant to be in an Airbnb tonight, the lovely suburb of Clifton, and I lugged my stuff over there and I couldn't find it. So I've managed to put myself up in a hotel until I can work out where the Airbnb actually is. Um, so anyway, what have I been doing? Okay, so there's a few apps which I've been checking out. The first one is Riot 1831, and that's not far from here. Actually, it's at Queens Park in Bristol. I'm in Bristol. I think it was at South Gloucestershire, something like that. And Riot 1831 was, I think, produced in something like 2003. So it was a real prototype exercise, and it was done with Calvium, the app developers here, who are really big around this neck of the woods. In fact, they're just down the road, called Calvium. And I don't know, I'm not quite sure how they made it, but I do know that it came out of a mobile Bristol project. And I think there was a lot of energy around geolocative audio and this whole kind of idea of digital placemaking back then in 2003, partly on the back of, from what I understand, Hewlett Packard had been really big here in Bristol, and for whatever reason, I think it came to an end. But a project called Mobile Bristol came out of that, and one of the teams of people who came out of that group of people from Hewlett Packard was this Calvium group, and they set up first of all App Furnace, and then they set up Calvium. So 1831, Riot 1831, it sounds like, because I'm not exactly sure, but it sounds like a bunch of audio engineers or sound people and students have had a lot of fun doing this. And it's set in Queen's Park, just down the road. And I believe that among all of the early model geolocative apps that Calvium have had under their banner, Riot 1831 is one of the few that they've actually kept going here. And maybe that's because it's literally just down the road from them. It's such a beautiful public park, and it's this old. Um, I mean, if you don't know Bristol, Bristol was a major trading port. It saw, all these boats that were trading with the outside world from uh, the sugar. I think they were trading sugar. They were trading slaves, tobacco, and so this was an incredibly important port. And Queens Park, just down the road here, was a hub for where the wealthy mercantile class lived, and slightly away from the docks. And there was a riot in 1831 that precipitated some major changes around here. And I think that instead of it being just a small cohort of people who were voting and making all the decisions, it became a much more, it expanded exponentially until I think the men, the fellas, got the vote after a while. So it was a big push from the working people to be represented. And there was a very famous series of riots, I think, around the time of 1831. And so this app is something of a celebration of that. And it's a very rudimentary layout. You've really just got one circle as you come in, and it kind of spells out the proposition that you're going to be walking into the Queen's Park, and you're going to hear a range of voices and antics from people who were involved in the riot. And then you walk into the square and you move into a new sound field. You can see two sound fields on your app, and it's uh, a bit of biffo, a bit of fires, a bit of yelling and screaming. There's the old guard trying to hold on to their control, and it really comes across as quite an amazing sort of piece that's born out of the community here. So I really like Riot 1831, not necessarily because I think it's doing anything new at this point, but because it's a legacy piece. It's a piece that I think really speaks to uh, people kind of coming together collaboratively with this new technology and really seeing what it could kind of do. And I think they must have had a lot of fun doing it. So the next one that I did, well, these are in no order, but these are some of the apps that I've done, was the Cardiff Port development area around. I think it's Port Teigr. I'm sorry, I don't speak Welsh clearly. Uh, and this one is part of a placemaking project along the newly developed and being developed port, Cardiff Port area. And it's a really stunning location. It's a really amazing bay. Again, it's like Bristol. It was another one of those really integral ports in the 1800s during the heyday of the trading and the boats coming and going from the south of England, heading over to North America and down to the Caribbean. So I was quite keen on doing this, and I'd seen the write up in one of Calvium's newsletters about the placemaking initiatives that they've been involved in, and that this heritage trail was one of them. So I managed to find my way down to the port about a week ago, I think it must have been, in the cold, driving rain. It was very windy, and booted up the app and was surprised that I could only see two sound fields. So I thought maybe there was some just down a bit further, just off the map, or wasn't quite sure what was going on. And the first sound field was quite a beautiful, poetic and well scripted piece that was being obviously read, I would say, by an actress around the legacy of the ships and the port, and the lives of the fishermen, and the way in which people lived that life very much um, at the forefront of the ocean there. And it was a beautiful piece, and a really quite um, lovely piece. And then I moved to the second audio file, and I was really surprised that it was um, a range of extracts, quite nicely produced, but a range of pieces that were from businesses around the port in question, and they were talking about the businesses that they were running. And I felt a little bit like I was back at the Battersea power station project where I'd heard a number of sound files that had described the power station and given accounts of the size of the chimney, and there was a lot of information, historical information about the Battersea power station. And then one of the last sound files that you come into is it starts off very sort of slick. It's black and white photos, and then the photos start moving. They're moving images, and eventually it almost comes into a piece of marketing. And I felt like I was being um, brought into, I suppose, the concept that's behind the development at the Cardiff port. And I don't think I would have signed up for that if that's what I thought I was getting. I think I probably wouldn't have done the app. I had the impression that it was a heritage app. Um, I mean, it goes under, what does it say? It says the Port Teigr Trail. Um, uh, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say it's heritage, but it says it's a trail. And for me, the two sound files were so very much in contrast, and I felt that I was sort of being taken inside the businesses along there, that I pulled back and I didn't finish that, and I did feel a bit shortchanged by this one. I didn't feel like it really gave me much meat and potatoes to go on in terms of it being a meaningful exchange. I felt it was fairly superficial, and I've read the information that Calvium's been putting out on their newsletters around the projects they've been involved in, and I did feel like it was a bit of a gloss over. Sorry, Calvium, and uh, it didn't in any way um, prompt me to do any of those again. In fact, I felt like I was wasting my time a bit there. And I have to say, I'm a bit surprised with both the Battersea Power Station and the Cardiff Bay, um, uh, the Cardiff Bay Walk. Um, I'm a bit surprised um, that there's no local voices. I'm not hearing any people who've been. Um, I'm hearing some script. I'm certainly hearing some script, and I'm certainly hearing, um, you know, some nice moments. There's some nice. It's all there in terms of the production, the levels are nice, the voices are well done, and certainly at Cardiff Bay, there is I think it's about a 7-minute piece. That piece is a lovely piece. It's not really contextualized for me. I don't really understand who I'm hearing from, or why that's been given priority. What I would have loved to have heard from both of those is people who've got a natural association with those places, and to hear their voices and to hear their memories. So grumble, grumble on account of Cardiff Bay Walk, and also um, the, um, the Battersea one, which I've spoken about before. One that I've just done today, which has, I think, it strikes a different note, is at this remarkable place which is just out of Cardiff called Traces Olion. Is it Traces Olion? And it's at this remarkable place called St Faggins, which is just about 10 minutes out of Cardiff, and it occupies, I think, a couple of nearly 100 acres, and they've got some remarkable architectural buildings, and sort of documents of the different layers of culture that that are still evident in Wales today, with a range of different design houses from from ages ago right through to today. and there's a sort of a museum and a visitors information centre. And I spent, I think, the best part of an hour and a half with this guy who was in this beautiful old 1500s house. And he was weaving, and he had all these industrial looms, and it was just gorgeous. I just loved it. So I really loved the feel of St. Faggins, and and the app that I did, Traces Olion, is I found out from a woman called Jenny Kidd today, who works in this area. She works in cultural history, social history, digital social history at Cardiff University, that it was undertaken in a partnership with the Welsh Museum, St Faggins, and also the University of Cardiff to kind of cut their teeth a bit on some geolocative stuff. And I think it was, the first one of the first major projects that they've undertaken. And apparently, it arose from out of conversations with the gardeners who had been there for quite some time. And they really wanted to get people out into the broader gardening area, as opposed to sort of hovering around the information and the museum centre. And it certainly did that for me. Now, the interesting thing for me about traces is that often when I do these projects, I'm assuming that they're going to work with GPS. But it surprised me, and just like Vanitas in Australia, it's geolocative in that it connects us to places, and certainly stories connect to places, uh, but uh, it's not GPS cached. So we've got an app, we boot the app up, it tells us to wear the headphones, it tells us to put it into flight mode, and then it tells us where to start, which I had a little bit of trouble finding. And then we're sort of spun this quite remarkable tale, which reminded me of that rich lyrical writing of that first sound field at the Cardiff Harbour. Beautifully written, beautifully spoken, and it sounds like some original music behind it. And it gives us instructions on where to go, and it's in chapters. So the chapters correspond to different places, and they're using the idea of timing between the instructions and where we're going to stand to guess, sort of choreograph us across spaces and places. And to all intents and purposes, it worked well. Only I had to go back on the first chapter because I kept fiddling around with my gear, and I kept missing the instruction whether it was a left or right, or whether to follow the mud path or the solid path. So that makes it a little bit difficult, because when it's a linear sound file and it's not geocached, you can't really see yourself in relation to the proximity. You can't see yourself on a map. So I wasn't really able to get my bearings. The only bearings I was able to get were in relation to that information that I was being fed from those audio chapters. And but once I sort of got into it, I stepped into it, and it reminded me a little bit of the cartographer's confession, in that had I not been taken around this space in this garden, I don't think I would have really sort of developed a much more sort of personal connection with that place. So thumbs up for that, and thumbs up for the scripting, for the production. At the end of it, I did feel like I was at a loss as to who these characters were. I was still struggling a little bit as to what was prompting me to sort of, to go to the next place, and what was holding it together. I'm not an advocate for a sort of heavy narrative in these GPS things, but I do think that, it's this word proposition again. I do think that if we're going to give our time, in my case of probably about 40 minutes, then what is it that's being proposed, um, and how well is that being delivered? And I think with St Faggins with this walk around there, I think it would be quite hard for these guys to actually put this proposal forward to contending sound walkers like myself to actually be really clear about what it is that we're going to get from out of this experience, whether that's intrigue or mystery, or we're going to find out about, the couple who lived here, or just history from the place. I do think that it's important that stuff is spelled out fairly clearly before we begin. One thing I like though about audio files just being fairly generic across a place, they're not necessarily going to know, for instance, when I'm at the corner of a fountain, unless they give me clear instructions to stop there, is that you can faff around and you can do other things while the audio is going. I actually quite like that because there are often times where I get somewhere and I go, oh, isn't this amazing? I really want to get a photo here. So I quite like that. Whereas when you're on an app, if you try to get out of the system and you take a photograph, the app stops and then you've got to boot it up again. It can be a bit tedious. So there's some real simplicity, I think, about that layering of audio chapters that are just linear, as opposed to walking in and out of GPS picked up audio files via an app. So I spoke to Jenny today, and she said that they were deliberating as to whether or not to keep the St Faggins Traces app out there as an ongoing document, or to let it fall off the app shelves, or whether to reboot it and to kind of to revisit it and perhaps rethink it through and have another crack at it, maybe taking a new approach this time. So that was really great, actually talking to Jenny. I really enjoyed talking to her. She was very generous, and I don't mean to be disparaging in any way of these initiatives that these small, lowly funded projects are embarking on. I think it's great. I love this. I love the culture of, I suppose, adventure and exploration around using this type of technology and the different ways people are approaching that. So now I'd like to talk about one called Hidden Florence. And I think I went and spoke to the fellow by the name of Fabrizio Nivola, an Italian chap who's got lots of letters after his name. He teaches at the University of Exeter, and he has, I would say, embarked on what is quite possibly by um, by a stock standard kind of take on geolocative apps, which are cultural historical apps. He's probably got to date what I would say is probably the most successful app that I've come across. Now, I didn't do Hidden Florence. I haven't flown off and done it, unfortunately. I don't have the budget for that, even though Arts Queensland are behind me for this project. Thank you very much, Arts Queensland. You've been so generous, but we weren't quite able to get to Florence. But I think I get very clearly what Fabrizio's doing here, and he is using a Calvium backend. He's using a Calvium framework platform for this. Again, it is a one-off project uh, that actually I think it started about 3 years ago, and um, and this is the version 2. So I don't think version 2's up quite yet, but I got to see things like the wireframing and the design, and he had it all up in his mobile phone, and he was able to show me kind of how it looks, and it looks, I have to say, stunning. It looks really, really crash hot, and I was a bit green with envy actually. So the premise of Hidden Florence, if I've got it right, is that when you come to Florence, He's been working in tandem, I think, with the major tourism organisation, and they're trying to get people away from the overpopulated, over touristed sort of sites in Florence. And so this app is designed to take people away to the lesser known areas. And I believe that it's through, who is it? It's through a character. Um, is it Giovanni? It's through a fairly well-known character, and it's one of the cool things about the app is that it's layered in two ways. One is a Google Street Map with Florence today, and the second one is it's got a very old map. I think it might be from something like the 14th or the 13th century, which was around the time of our main protagonist. And um, and I think that they give you a number of walks that you can do through people who are associated with this time and place. And I think there's one, there's a female uh, voice, and there are, I think, forgive me, Fabrizio, I think there's sort of three or four walks that you can do through different character voices. So this is, I think, fairly straight down the line. I think Fabrizio has scripted this. He's done a lot of research. He himself, obviously, is a scholar in this area, and he's able to take visitors around these remarkable places um, in Florence. And again, you've got stop points along the way. I don't think there's any intervening music. I think you just go to story to story to story along a route, and you choose which route you're going to do dependent on which character you're traveling with. He's got it both in Italian and also in English, which I think is really smart. And I think he said to me that he had put it out in Italian, two of the characters in Italian, because he didn't. There was no money forthcoming from the Italian government. He said that most of the money, I think, has come from some sort of research grant that he's applied for. So he's really put a lot of work into this. And the thing that made me most green with envy is just the sheer number of downloads that he's been getting to date using version one. And they're anticipating, I think, with version two, that they're probably looking up to, anything up to and over and above sort of 100,000 downloads. So this is really starting to sort of gain traction with this model. When you come into a story, it's a very neat um, wireframing. It's very neat. It's got a lovely kind of clean photo with information. And interestingly, you can of course layer the old map against where you are currently in the system. And I think if you want extra information, the app allows you to spin off and go to sites online, and then be able to come back, I think, without losing that continuity of the experience. The the script is read out. I think Fabrizio's got some actors to do this. In fact, I think that's right, he got a production company to do the reading, uh, and the Italian reading, and I think there might even be a little bit of, is there some music or something in there? I'm not quite sure. Um, but anyway, look, thumbs up to Fabrizio. He's really, he's punching way above his weight. He's using, of course, the Calvium system, which is a very solid, robust system. He's paying a premium price and getting a premium product, I would say, and he's looking pretty chuffed about the whole thing, and so he should do too. So those are the apps really that I wanted to do a bit of a brief about thus far. I also wanted to say that I had the great pleasure of knocking on Calvium's door the other day and being able to go upstairs and to talk with Jo Reid from Calvium for about an hour and a half, an hour, and I was really chuffed being able to do that. I'd initially contacted Calvium probably 5 years ago because we were trying to kind of think through sound trails, what became sound trails at the time, and we were costing out what it would cost us to build a platform, one that would have the capacity to build in a number of sites and for us to have a level of control. We decided not to go with Calvium, which is in some respects a shame because they offer such a good product. But then again, we wouldn't have been able to have afforded to have done what we've done and continued to do, which is to add in new sites and to maintain a strong level of control over um, the whole the whole caboodle, the whole kit and caboodle. Um, so it was great meeting Jo. She's very switched on, and she's, I think, got a really encyclopedic understanding of this whole area because, of course, they came out of a Hewlett Packard, and they formed an organisation that came out of them. And I think they were very involved in Mobile Bristol in that particularly creative um, iteration of sort of the Bristol digital art scene here. And I think they've probably overseen more creative geolocative projects than anyone else around here. Um, so one of the things that she talked about pretty much immediately was that um, with the changes in the platforms where they have to update their apps correspondingly. I think iOS has gone from uh, what they call 32-bit to 64-bit um, apps. I think I've got that right. And I think consequently, Jo was saying that's meant literally that a lot of projects that were just sort of teetering on the edge that they were trying to maintain and keep going in the public sphere have had to fall off the shelves in the app store, and hence something like Riot 1831 is one of the few that's actually made it through to still being current today. I don't pretend to understand what that means going between 32 and 64-bit, but it certainly made me appreciate that we're still kind of up and running in the mix. Um, and Jo talked about um, she talked about them increasingly being reluctant to embark on more sort of oral history, social history, community based geolocative projects. She said that they're invariably a lot of work. There's the developers' costs, there's the ongoing fees that communities often struggle to meet to keep those systems maintained. And she said that their bread and butter, by and large, now as app developers, is with the larger companies. And she said that that's a lot easier for them. She said that they're seeing their more sort of creative end at um, the placemaking um, corner of the geolocative projects. And I think that's an interesting sort of question for me because certainly if the Battersea Power Station or the Cardiff Bay app that they were involved in are anything to go by, I'm really not. I'm not sure why um, potential people who are coming there to explore the place. I'm not sure what they're going to get out of something like that because, as I said, they do seem a bit like a sort of a, they've got the developer's blueprint written all over them. That said, Cardiff Bay's got some quite interesting placemaking initiatives along the foreshore there, and it does have a sense of energy and creativity, and I think I can see why Calvium would be an interesting uh, partner to have in that mix in terms of digital placemaking. But I'm still a bit unsure about what to make of this term placemaking when it seems to go hand in glove with developments, and particularly large billion-dollar developments. It would seem to me that there's obviously some sort of brief from the council to to do some sort of heritage um, placemaking, digital placemaking material, and that these um, have a certain formula about them. So yeah, but the I guess the key thing for me in this, and in talking with someone like Calvium, with Jo from Calvium, and the key thing, one of the key things that's coming up for me on this trip is the idea of the longevity of some of these projects, and also the control that the um, producers or the key organisations who are behind them have in the ownership of the IP. And um, and I'm feeling like it's something that's really an interesting dilemma. If we had, for instance, undertaken to produce sound trails with Calvium, we wouldn't have had the IP of that app. That's my understanding. Whereas with Sound Trails at the moment, we've got a developer, and we do own the IP of that. So long as we can maintain those ongoing costs to keep it up to date with operating systems, then we're very much in the driver's seat. Um, so I suppose, with something like Bristol and all of these projects that have been here as part of the creative digital space, and all those iterations that these projects have gone through over the years, there's a real sort of built-in sense of redundancy about so many of them. I mean, some of them um, are literally kind of up, they play. It might be in collaboration with a festival, which is no bad thing, and then they're down again. And so for me, uh, as someone who's kind of very interested in a lot of these projects, particularly these early projects, because they're exploring these sort of new ways. It's like there's no kind of template with some of these, so they're trying new things, and I'm really interested in seeing the different approaches they had, the um, different sense that they had of sort of making sense of stories on place. I think for me that's really important. But because they're grounded within an app framework, and that app framework needs to be maintained in conjunction with updates and operating systems, whether Android or iOS, and there's developers fees, and there might be regular fees just to keep the thing going, then these can be really costly and high maintenance kind of projects. And I guess, in stark contrast to something like Fabrizio's Hidden Florence, which is obviously really hitting the numbers, you have to ask yourself, um, are these worth it? Why would some organisations spend this amount of money behind something that possibly is only going to get a couple of downloads a month? And why would you sort of commit that money to just keeping that up? That said, for someone like me to come along and to be very interested in exploring them and to be trialing them, the modern ones and the older ones, there is no way I can really get out there and do these projects, which is sad because doing them on location and having that sense of the way the app interfaces with the functionality and the place and the way in which the story's engineered across space is such a part of the beauty and the mystery behind a lot of these projects. Um, Jo Reid was saying that she's not sure how long a lot of these more sort of boutique kind of geolocative apps can maintain their presence on the App Store with so much money that's got to go in to keep them up there, and it's a frightening prospect because it's certainly something that we can relate to with sound trails in Australia. She was talking about the idea of a web-based application which would pick up via your mobile coverage, and certainly in cities like Bristol, that's probably quite a viable proposition. But I think one of the things that you're going to lose if you have a web-based application is that you lose that incredible texture when it comes to the way in which you can code audio to work in response to certain things. Um, do you, for instance, create a cluster of audio files and you can they're all GPS picked up, and once you've done each of those stories in one particular spot, then you move to a different stage of the app that tells you clearly on a map you're going to have to head down this way, and do certain things pop up in relation to that particular journey, say from chapter one through to chapter two. Can you layer sound fields, for instance, ambient sounds or narrative sounds or instructional sounds, as opposed to primary stories? Primary stories might come with captions, they might come with photographs. So there's a whole raft of sort of small and intricate ways in which the system is executed through an app that creates a very um, can create a very integrated and wholly sort of immersive or embodied experience, which I'm not sure that web-based applications are going to have any of that functionality yet, but Jo was saying that Calvium may be interested in doing something like down the track. And I think this is at a really interesting point here, to what extent people are going to start turning away from building these one-off geolocative apps on the basis of the cost, the maintenance fees, the developer licenses, and the sheer expertise that's got to go into them. Do they own the coding? Do they own the IP at the end of that? If they're new to this, all of these questions are kind of here. Let alone what is the potential for longevity of these projects, etc., etc., etc. So that's a bit of a thumbnail as to what I've been up to, as well as weathering through a particularly nasty UK lurgy. And I think I'm starting to get back on form, even though I don't know what's happened to my Airbnb tonight. So I've parked myself here at what I was hoping was quite a fancy hotel, but it's fairly average. So if you've made it this far, I hope you're getting something out of this. This is a rich trip. I'll just say that I've had some really interesting conversations with the ambient literature team here at Pervasive Media Studios, the Watershed Studios, and I'm meeting them again in 2 days' time. And there's some really interesting conversations going on in terms of where they're headed with their project, and and where there might be some possible, possible dialogue about some things in the future. I don't know, uh, you know, but it's good. I think I'm getting my mojo back again, and thank you very much for listening. I am getting better at this, aren't I? I am getting better at this audio blog. I was able to talk there for 45 minutes. Neil, if you've hung on this far, Helen's dad, I didn't look to the left, did I? Thank you. Bye bye.